Welcome back everyone to another Tony Stewart's All-American Racing setup video. Today's video takes us to Elk Ridge Raceway where we're going to focus on the big block modifieds. Now, as I mentioned before, as I move throughout the game testing out different tracks and car combinations, I'm going to try to focus on the ones that give me the most enjoyment, the most challenge, and ultimately the most fun overall. And I feel like Elk Ridge, with its 2/3 of a mile length, really is best suited to the big block modifieds. However, that certainly doesn't mean you can't have fun with the other series. I do plan to go and do some setups for the other series as well, but so far the big block modifieds have been far and away the most fun for me, so that's why I choose to focus on them more than the others. Now, Elk Ridge provides a unique experience. The AI are very competitive at this track. In fact, it was very difficult to get the race win against the AI. They are very fast compared to what I can do. So what about Elk Ridge really piqued my interest? Well, a couple of things. Number one, there are multiple grooves around this place. You can run high, you can run low, and in particular, the two ends of the track are very different in how they race. Starting with turns 1 and 2, very wide arc in there. You can easily run this wide open if you so choose, but remember, making sure you hit your marks and accelerating in the proper direction is always going to be the most important thing. But turns 1 and 2, much easier side of the track. It's when you get to 3 and 4 is when things become interesting. I have found that my preferred method for turns 3 and 4 is very different than what the AI want to do, and that a lot of times leads to contact. They do not avoid contact much at all in this game. It's all about slide jobs, whether they're clear or not. But my preferred method to go through turns 3 and 4 is actually to use the brake to slow the car down some and to get it rotated. I want to hit that bottom. My apex is down by the berm on the inside of the corner in turn 3. I want to hit that early and then use the remainder of the corner to slide out toward the wall, accumulating and accelerating as much speed as I can on exit. So basically, I'm trying to get the car slowed down and rotated early so that I can then spin the remainder of the corner accelerating and gaining speed. However, another way to go through there is to go through the entry much quicker and then try to slow down or at least wait before accelerating hard till you get somewhere around the middle of the corner. So there's multiple ways to get around this place, and they can be equally as successful. I've had good luck with both methods. However, my preferred is to slow down a little bit early on entry and make sure that I can spend most of my time accelerating through the remainder of the corner. But a lot of fun, very competitive AI. Let's get started. Let's get started by talking about the left front and the right front. We'll sort of talk about these two together and then do the same thing for the left rear and the right rear. On the left front, camber angle at +3, right front at -5. You're going to see a lot of similarities between what I did here and Baxterville, and that's good. Once I find a feel in the car that I like, I generally like to work on that type of a setup first, and then once I get that dialed in, I try some very different things to see if I can find another feel that I like from time to time. But here, similar to what I did at Baxterville, worked wonders for me ultimately, so that's what I stuck with. You can certainly get by, once again, with more camber or less camber than I have chosen. This is simply to get you started, and then by all means, try working out, particularly on the right front, because this is where you're going to get the majority of your grip in these cars. On the right side, anything you do on the right side is what I would consider a major adjustment, since when you're going through the corners, that's where most of the grip is going to be anyway. So by all means, try out using more camber angle on the right front or less camber angle and see if that works best for you. Again, it's all about balance. I don't need the car to just over rotate on me. That scrubs off speed just like under rotating does. So balance is what we're searching for. Spring rate 300 and 500 on the left and right front. Remember, the more spring rate you have in the left front, the better the car will want to rotate on corner entry. So that's going to make your car looser on corner entry. Now, it can tighten the car up on corner exit, but corner entry is what we're focused on right now with the front of the car, and the higher the number, the looser the car on entry. Over to the right front, I like to use the maximum right front spring whenever possible, simply because it gives me something to lean on. and it helps to keep the car from rolling over on the right front, which is not a feeling that I really prefer in a race car. I like the right front to be sturdy and provide that really strong right front and give me something to lean on going through the corner. But that is going to tighten the car up overall. It's going to reduce the amount of rotation that you get from the car. So reducing or lowering that right front spring is going to help the car to rotate. It's going to make the car looser on corner entry. So keep that in mind as you're testing. As far as the shocks, 5 on each of the 2 rebounds from the front shocks, but the bump is a little bit different. So we're at +5 on the shock bump on the left front, but only +3 on the right front. Reason being, adding a little bit of bump to the left front just helps the car to rotate on corner entry. But by all means, test out going down to about 3 and up even higher than 5 if you need the car to rotate more. So the higher number here, the more the car is going to rotate on entry. On the right front, it's going to be just the opposite. It's going to be just like what we talked about with the spring rate. The lower the number, the more the car is going to want to rotate on entry. The car is going to want to roll over on that right front. The higher the number here, the tighter the car is going to be, particularly on entry and also through the remainder of the corner as well. Tire pressures, 18 and 20. Again, more tire pressure in the right front simply because I need something to lean on, give me a little bit of stability and good feel going through the corner without the car over-rotating. However, if you're looking to free up the entry of the corner, here's yet another option. Lower that tire pressure from 20 down to around 19, 18, and so on, and see if that doesn't help you get the rotation you're looking for on corner entry. For the left front, just like what we've been talking about with both the spring rate and the shock bump setting, increasing this number will make the car looser on entry, lowering it, make it a little tighter on entry. Now moving to the rear of the car, by far and away the most important thing you're going to do here, really a couple of things. Number one is that tire stagger. I like to leave this, if at all possible, maxed out. So that's 4 inches of tire stagger in the right rear. That's going to help the car to rotate. The higher the tire stagger, the more rotation you get out of the car, and ultimately the more speed you'll be able to carry. However, it does change the feel of the car and can make it very easy for the car to over-rotate, and you spend a lot of time trying to chase the back end. So keep that in mind, that lowering the tire stagger can certainly bring some stability back into the car at the sacrifice of overall speed usually. The other big thing you're going to need to dictate here is the split in the rear springs. So here you notice I've got 400 in the left rear, 500 in the right rear. That's 100 pounds of split in the rear springs. The more split you have in the rear springs, the looser the car is going to be, particularly under throttle. And of course, in these dirt cars at these tracks in the game, with the physics the way they are, you're going to spend a lot of time on the gas. So more split in the rear springs, the looser the car is going to be. So if I wanted to make this car even looser on the throttle, then in this case, I would simply come in and lower this left rear spring to something like 350 or even 300, and that should get the car to rotate even more when on the throttle. As far as the shock settings here, the 3.5 setting worked very well, but here, the shock bump setting, the higher the number you use on the left rear, the tighter the car is going to be. Again, think of it a lot like you do the spring rate here. The higher the spring rate in the left rear, the tighter the car is going to be when under the throttle. Same thing with the shock bump. The higher the number, the tighter the car is going to be under throttle. For the right rear, the higher the spring rate, the looser the car is going to be under throttle. Same thing with the shock bump. The higher this number is, the more pressure you're putting on that right rear tire, and the looser the car will be. As far as tire temperatures, 18 in the left rear, 16 in the right rear. Drop that right rear a little bit because that gives me the feel I'm looking for. It gives me a little bit of extra grip, tightens the car up a little bit on corner exit, just for a little bit of stability and car control is really what that gives me. However, the more you increase this number, again, just like we talked about with the spring rate and the shock bump setting, the higher the number, the looser the car will be on exit. And with the tire pressure in the left rear, the higher the number, the tighter the car is going to be on exit. We've already dealt with the stagger. Now let's move on to the front and the rear. So the brake bias here is really going to be determined by how you use the brakes. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I prefer to use the brakes a little bit more brake on corner entry to turn 3 so that I can get the car turned, get down to the bottom, and sort of right up against that berm on the inside of corners 3 and 4, just so that I can get the car rotated. So that means for me, maybe a little bit lower brake bias can be used. Now, I prefer to get the braking done as much as I can in a straight line, so it's not as big of a deal. However, the lower the number you use here on this brake bias, the looser the car will be under braking. That can be particularly helpful if you're trying to trail brake it into the corner, and as you're turning, apply some brake. The lower number on brake bias will help that car to continue to rotate. However, if your car rotates plenty good on its own, and maybe you need to tighten the car up to add a little bit more stability under brakes, then increase the brake bias, and that will tighten the car up a little bit when under braking. So again, generally I'm going to use numbers that are lower than 50% overall in these cars, but the lower the number, the looser. Under braking, higher number is tighter overall. Front weight is at 50%. So I tried out higher numbers than this, actually quite a bit higher than this, up around 52, 53%, and lower numbers down somewhere around 46, 47%, somewhere in that range. And it all worked, quite honestly. The biggest thing that I had to work on for this track was the line I was running, and my approach to the corners, much more important than the overall setup. So front weight here, 50.0, really worked best for me to allow the car to rotate, but also to keep enough stability in the car that it didn't over-rotate on me and scrub off a lot of speed that way. With the front weight, the higher the number, the less the car will want to rotate. So the tighter the car will want to be. Lower number on front weight, the more the car will want to rotate. So just find a good balance there for you based on how you're driving the car. Left weight, very easy. We want the max setting since we're on an oval. Corner weight, once again, maxed out at 55.0. And if I was a betting man, I would bet that we're going to see that in most of the setups that I do in this game, simply because I love the feel of it. It helps to control the rotation of the car, and in particular, the speed of the rotation of the car. And that really matches up with my driving style. I don't like quick, jerky movements from the car. I prefer slow and smooth movements out of the car. And using a higher number on the corner weight or the wedge of the car, that really gives me what I'm looking at, because it slows down the rotation of the car. However, if you want quicker responses out of the car, you want to be able to turn that wheel and the car really rotate and pivot much quicker, then simply drop this number down to 54, 53, or much lower is certainly possible, and that will allow the car to rotate much quicker. Anti-roll bar. Again, this is a preference thing for me. Maxed out at 2.0 because it gives some stability to the car and reduces the amount of roll I get overall in the car. However, if you prefer the car to roll more through the corners, you like that feeling better and that works best for you, then by all means, lower this number or drop this number by 1 to 2 clicks at a time and see if that gives you the feel you're looking for. But remember, the higher the number on the anti-roll, the tighter or stiffer the car will feel. The lower the number, the more the car will want to roll, and it gives it a little bit more of a sluggish feel to the car. Ride height, once again, really haven't spent a lot of time messing with that because I haven't had any issues with bottoming out. So that's something I might deal with a little bit later on. But for right now, we're trying to get some baselines out for you guys. In the rear of the car, anti-roll bar. Now, we also have one of these in the front of the car, but you notice it is a much smaller diameter in the rear of the car. Here, this is basically the minimum setting while still keeping a rear roll bar. So if I go down one more click, it takes the roll bar completely away, which is going to unhook the rear end and give you a little bit more feel out of the rear end, a little bit more roll out of the rear end, and can really tighten the car up. So if you're having trouble with the rear end of the car just being not hooked up and it just doesn't get the feel that you're looking for, maybe it's too loose overall and over rotating the car, then simply unhook the anti-roll bar in the rear, and that should help you out. I like to use the minimum setting here because I do like the feel of having the anti-roll bar there, but in general, it hasn't helped me to continue increasing it up toward, say, 1 inch and making it much closer to what we would use in the front of the car. So I do like an anti-roll bar, just not a huge bar. Track bar, once again, no track bar in the right side. The right side would be more for the exit, and I find more than anything with these cars, I'm over-rotating, if anything, on corner exit, so I certainly do not want to raise this thing, which would make it worse. It would help the rotation of the car on corner exit. It's going to make the car looser on corner exit, which for me is not something I'm looking for because the car is already rotating plenty enough for me. However, one adjustment that I have found that I really like is the track bar on the left side. Up, in this case, to 0.7, a little bit higher, I believe, than what I used at Baxterville because I needed a little bit more rotation of the car on entry, particularly for turns 3 and 4, a much tighter side of the track. So the higher value you use on the track bar left, that's going to help you to be looser or get more rotation out of the entry of the corner. Lower values for the track bar left are going to tighten the entry of the corner. So very good adjustability there. Miscellaneous, wheel lock, once again at 10 degrees, which is shocking to me. I expected to use much higher values, as I mentioned in the Baxterville setting. So 10 degrees, which is the minimum setting. Again, going back to the way I prefer to drive the car. I don't like jerky movements out of the car. I prefer slow and smooth inputs to the car, and 10 degrees gives me exactly that. However, if you're looking for quicker movements and quicker reaction from your steering wheel inputs, then by all means increase this number to 15, 18, 20, and so on, and that's certainly going to speed up the steering. Steering offset here at 1.0, which is lower than I used at Baxterville. Higher numbers closer to what I used at Baxterville, around 1.5, introduced a little bit of a pull to the right and a little bit of instability on the straightaway as well as corner entry when I'm preparing to try to pitch the car in. So I didn't like that, so I dropped the number down a little bit, and 1.0 has worked very well for me, but there's obviously plenty of room for adjustability. This is essentially tied to camber and tire stagger. So the more stagger, the more camber you're using, generally the higher number here in the steering offset you'll want to use, unless you simply love turning to the right. And the more steering offset you use, the less you'll find yourself having to turn overall to the right. Tire compound, once again, like we talked about at Baxterville, using the soft compound because I haven't figured out a reason that I need to use the other two compounds. The other two compounds, the medium and the firm or the hard compound, they are looser for me simply because they have less overall grip. So I would assume that at some point in the future, we're going to get tire wear modeled into the game and grip fall off, and that's going to force us to really think about what compound we want to use, especially in those longer feature events. So you might, for example, you might want to go with a softer compound for qualifying or some of the short heat races, whereas you might need to go for a medium or a harder compound for the longer feature events. And again, that would vary from track to track as well. Then we get to the gear settings. Once again, first and second gear, really didn't mess around with a whole lot. 1.5 and 1.0 really seemed to work pretty well for me overall in first gear. And then the rear end ratio is what I really focus on. 4.5 here. Remember, the rear end ratio is going to determine how many RPMs you end up turning from the engine, which has a couple of important uses. Number one, we don't want to get on the rev limiter so hard that we're limiting the speed we have on the straightaway. But the other thing that the RPMs do is more RPMs is generally going to mean a looser car overall. Fewer RPMs would mean a tighter car overall. So if you have a little bit of room to run more RPMs and you increase this from 4.5 up to say 4.6, 4.7, then that's going to turn more RPMs and is generally going to be a looser car. Let's say that you decide you want the car to be a little bit tighter overall. Since we spend so much time on the throttle, then simply drop this down 1 to 2 clicks from 4.5 to maybe 4.4, 4.3, and that's going to turn fewer RPMs and tighten the car a little bit overall. So that's going to do it for today. Thank you so much for joining me, and stay tuned for more Tony Stewart's All-American Racing.